The Ghost Continent, a true story of Mu. The Pacific Ocean is a graveyard of worlds. Sailors have always known this. Long before the first European ships crossed its vast blue emptiness, the people who lived on its scattered islands spoke of lands that had sunk beneath the waves, entire kingdoms swallowed by the sea in a single night of fire and thunder. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as myth, the fever dreams of isolated peoples who had stared too long at the horizon. But here is the astonishing truth. They were right. The story of how we discovered this, how we unearthed a ghost continent through fragments of zircon, ancient primate bones, and the obsessive visions of a Victorian soldier, is one of the most remarkable detective stories in the history of science. A tale that reveals not just a lost land, but the very nature of how we come to know anything at all about our planet's deep, hidden past. It begins not with a map, but with a problem. The year is 1864, and the great English zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater is staring at a puzzle that will not let him sleep. For years, he has been studying the distribution of animals across the globe. The patterns are obvious. Certain species live only in certain places, and their ranges seem to tell a story about the history of the Earth itself. But one group of animals confounds him utterly: the lemurs. These strange, big-eyed primates are found almost exclusively on the island of Madagascar, off the southeast coast of Africa. A few related species exist in India and Southeast Asia, yet bizarrely, none are found on the African mainland, which lies just a few hundred miles from Madagascar. Think about what that means. If lemurs evolved in Africa, why did they not spread to the neighboring continent? If they evolved elsewhere, how did they reach Madagascar at all? Sclater writes a paper for the Quarterly Journal of Science, in which he proposes a stunning explanation. There must have once been a giant continent spanning the Indian Ocean, connecting Madagascar to India, and perhaps even to Southeast Asia. This continent, he argues, would explain not only the lemurs, but also the distribution of other plants and animals that seem to jump across vast stretches of ocean. He names this hypothetical landmass Lemuria, after the very creatures that had led him to its discovery. It is a well-known fact, Sclater writes, that the mammalia of Madagascar present very remarkable peculiarities. The island is, in fact, the headquarters of the lemurs, and contains no fewer than 36 species of this anomalous group, while the rest of the world contains only about 12. The explanation of this anomaly will, I think, be found in the supposition that a large continent once occupied parts of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, for which I should propose the name Lemuria. Sclater's proposal is not unusual for his time. In the 19th century, before the theory of plate tectonics was widely accepted, scientists routinely invoked land bridges and sunken continents to explain the distribution of living things. The Earth's geography was thought to have been largely static since its creation. The only changes were the slow rise and fall of mountain ranges and sea levels. When faced with animals that appeared in impossible places, the logical conclusion was that these places had once been connected by land that was now lost to the sea. Sclater's Lemuria is a purely scientific hypothesis, grounded in logic and observation. It is not a myth, not a fantasy, but a careful inference drawn from the evidence available to him. And for a time, it is accepted by many scientists as a reasonable explanation for a puzzling phenomenon. But then, something strange happened. At almost the same moment, across the Atlantic, another man is about to make a discovery that will set the world ablaze, turning a scientific hypothesis into a cultural obsession that would last for generations. Augustus Le Plongeon is a French-American traveler, amateur archaeologist, and Egyptologist. In the 1860s and 1870s, he devotes himself to exploring the ruins of the Maya civilization in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. He believes, with an almost religious fervor, that the Maya were the founders of all human civilization, that their knowledge was older and wiser than anything in Europe or Egypt. Le Plongeon claims to have decoded the Trono Codex, a pre-Columbian Maya manuscript. More precisely, he relies on the work of Charles Etienne, Brasseur de Berber, who in 1864 had attempted to translate the codex using the Zealandia alphabet. Brasseur believed that a word he read as Mu referred to a land submerged by a catastrophe. Le Plongeon seizes on this with boundless enthusiasm. He declares that he has discovered the true history of the world. Mu, he says, was a vast continent in the Atlantic Ocean, what Plato called Atlantis. Its civilization was older than Egypt, older than Greece, older than anything. It was the motherland of all humanity. He writes in his book Queen Mu and the Egyptian Sphinx, in our journey westward across the Atlantic we shall pass in sight of that spot where once existed the pride and life of the ocean, the land of Mu, which, at the epoch that we have been considering, had not yet been visited by the wrath of human, that lord of volcanic fires to whose fury it afterward fell a victim. The description of that land, given to Solon by Sancha, priest at Sais, its destruction by earthquakes and submergence, recorded by Plato in his Timaeus, have been told and retold so many times that it is useless to encumber these pages with a repetition of it. Le Plongeon's Mu is a dramatic, romantic vision, a lost paradise of wise kings and beautiful queens. When Mu sinks beneath the waves, its survivors flee to Central America, where they become the Maya. Other refugees go to Egypt, led by the legendary Queen Mu, who founds the civilization of the Nile. It is a magnificent story. There is only one problem. None of it is true. Modern scholars have shown that Le Plongeon's translation are almost entirely fantasies. The word Mu in the Trono Codex almost certainly does not refer to a sunken continent. The Maya texts have nothing to say about Atlantis or the land of Mu. Le Plongeon simply saw what he wanted to see, bending the evidence to fit his grand, pre-existing narrative. But the seed had been planted. The idea of Mu had taken root, and it would not be easily dislodged. If Le Plongeon is the father of Mu, James Churchward is its prophet. Churchward is a British soldier, writer, and occultist. In the early 20th century, he becomes obsessed with the idea of Mu and transforms it into a full-fledged mythology that will captivate millions for decades to come. Churchward claims to have stumbled upon the truth while serving in India. He says he befriended a high-ranking temple priest who showed him a set of ancient clay tablets, thousands of them, inscribed in a dead language called Nagamaya. According to Churchward, only 2 other people in all of India could read this language. He convinced the priest to teach him, promising to restore and preserve the precious tablets. These tablets, Churchward said, told the true history of humanity, and it all began on Mu. He published his findings in a series of books, beginning with The Lost Continent of Mu, the Motherland of Man, in 1926. The books are a sensation. They paint a picture of a paradise on Earth, a continent stretching from Hawaii to Easter Island, from the Marianas to the coast of South America. Mu was home to 64 million people, a civilization of immense wisdom and technological prowess. They built giant stone cities, traveled the world in advanced ships, and possessed knowledge of the universe that we have only recently rediscovered. The population of Mu was divided into several classes, with a ruling elite known as the Knuckles, who were the keepers of sacred knowledge. Churchward describes the land as a tropical paradise, filled with lush vegetation and abundant wildlife. The cities were built of massive stone blocks, precisely cut and fitted together without mortar, just like the famous ruins of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, or the temples of Egypt. The Muans were master astronomers and mathematicians. They understood the laws of the universe, including the force of gravity and the nature of atomic energy. They even had flying machines, which they used to travel between the various parts of their vast empire. The civilization was peaceful and prosperous, guided by a deep spiritual wisdom that connected them to the cosmos. But, like all paradises, it could not last. Churchward writes that about 12,000 years ago, a terrible catastrophe struck Mu. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and immense tidal waves tore the continent apart. In a single, violent night, Mu sank beneath the Pacific Ocean, taking its cities, its people, and its glorious civilization with it. Only a few scattered survivors managed to escape, carrying the memory of their homeland with them to Egypt, India, and the Americas. It was these survivors, Churchward claimed, who founded all the great civilizations of the ancient world. Churchward's books are filled with maps, diagrams, and photographs of the tablets he claimed to have seen. He provides detailed descriptions of Mu's language, its religion, its government, and its daily life. Everything is presented with the authority of a man who has seen the truth with his own eyes, and people believe him. Millions of readers around the world are captivated by the story of Mu. It offers a comforting vision of a glorious past, a time when humanity was wise and powerful, and connected to its spiritual roots. It explains the mysteries of ancient civilizations in a simple, dramatic way, and it hints that perhaps, someday, we could rediscover that lost wisdom and reclaim our rightful place in the universe. But Churchward's Mu is also a product of its time. The 1920 saw a surge of interest in lost continents, ancient astronauts, and occult knowledge, fueled by the popularization of archaeology and the discovery of previously unknown civilizations such as the Maya and the Indus Valley. It was also a time of great anxiety. The devastation of World War I, the collapse of old empires, and the rise of new ideologies all contributed to a sense that the modern world was somehow adrift, cut off from a more stable and meaningful past. Lost continent stories like Mu and Atlantis provided a way to imagine that past, to reconnect with something larger and more enduring than the chaotic present. They were a form of mythological escapism, a way of finding meaning in a world that seemed increasingly fragmented and uncertain. But science was also advancing rapidly, and it was only a matter of time before it caught up with the mythmakers. The key breakthrough came not from archaeology or history, but from a field that, at first glance, seemed completely unrelated: geology. In the early 20th century, a German meteorologist named Alfred Wegener proposed a radical new theory. He argued that the continents were not fixed in place, but were slowly drifting across the surface of the Earth. Wegener pointed to the jigsaw puzzle fit of the continents, the distribution of ancient fossils, and the geological similarities between regions separated by ocean. His theory of continental drift was controversial at first, and many scientists dismissed it as implausible. But over the decades, evidence mounted. The discovery of paleomagnetism showed that rocks preserved a record of the Earth's magnetic field, and that this record indicated the continents had indeed moved. By the 1960s, the theory of plate tectonics was firmly established, revolutionizing our understanding of the Earth's history. Plate tectonics provided a new, scientific explanation for the distribution of plants and animals that had so puzzled Sclater a century earlier. The lemurs of Madagascar were not evidence of a lost continent. They were the product of a much longer, more complex history. Madagascar had once been part of a supercontinent called Gondwana, which also included Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica. About 160 million years ago, Gondwana began to break apart. Madagascar separated from Africa and then from India, carrying its unique fauna with it. The lemurs were stranded on an island that drifted away, isolated and free to evolve into the wonderful diversity we see today. This was far more elegant and scientifically satisfying than invoking a sunken continent. It explained not just the lemurs, but a whole host of other geological and biological puzzles, and it did so without requiring any magical or catastrophic events. The Earth's history was a story of slow, gradual change, of continents colliding and separating, of species evolving and going extinct. It was a story that was both more complex and more beautiful than anything Churchward had imagined. Yet, despite the triumph of plate tectonics, the idea of Mu would not die. In fact, it would undergo a remarkable transformation, shifting from a literal lost continent to something more elusive and profound. Scientists began to realize that the Pacific Ocean did, in fact, hide a ghost continent, not in the form of a sunken civilization, but in the form of a lost landmass called Zealandia. Zealandia is a vast, submerged continent that lies to the east of Australia. It is about 5 million square kilometers in size, roughly the same area as the Indian subcontinent. About 94% of it is currently underwater, with only a few scattered islands, including New Zealand, New Caledonia, and the Lord Howe Island group. rising above the surface. Zealandia was once part of Gondwana, just like Madagascar and India. About 80 million years ago, it began to separate from the supercontinent and slowly sank beneath the Pacific. The discovery of Zealandia was a genuine scientific revelation, one that reshaped our understanding of the Pacific region. It showed that large continental landmasses could indeed be submerged, leaving only fragments behind. This provided a new, plausible context for the stories of Mu and Lemuria. Perhaps, over time, myths and legend had preserved a distant memory of this real, sunken land. But even Zealandia could not account for the specific stories of Mu that Churchward had popularized. The lost civilization he described was simply too large, too sophisticated, and too conveniently placed to be real. Yet the fascination with Mu persisted, evolving into new forms. In the 1960s and 1970s, the writer James Bramwell, the psychic Edgar Cayce, and others continued to develop the mythology, linking Mu to the mysterious stone ruins on Easter Island, to the pyramids of Mexico, and even to the lost city of Atlantis. Cayce, known as the sleeping prophet, would enter a trance state and deliver readings about the past lives of his patients. In these readings, he frequently mentioned Mu and Atlantis, describing them as ancient civilizations that possessed advanced technology and spiritual wisdom. He claimed that Mu had been destroyed not just by geological upheaval, but by a spiritual corruption that had led to its downfall. These readings were enormously popular, and they helped to ensure that Mu remained in the public imagination well into the 21st century. But perhaps the most intriguing development is the recent discovery of the sunken continent of Mauritia, which was originally part of the supercontinent Gondwana, according to a 2013 study by scientists from Norway, Germany, and Britain. The granitic fragments discovered on the island of Mauritius, dated about 660 million years old, could only have come from a continental landmass that had since been broken up and submerged. The findings concluded that a small continent called Mauritia had existed between India and Madagascar. Over geological time, this ancient landmass was fragmented and covered by the lava flows from the Réunion hotspot, creating the volcanic island of Mauritius and the Mascarenes Plateau. The fragments of zircon found in the volcanic rocks provided conclusive evidence of this hidden continent, which had remained unknown for millions of years. The echoes of Mu and Lemuria suddenly found a new voice. The idea of a lost continent wasn't entirely a fantasy. It had become a scientific reality. What does all of this tell us about the nature of knowledge itself? The story of Mu is not simply a story of a lost land. It is a story of how humans have grappled with the vastness of time and the mystery of the past. It is a story of how we have used mythology to fill in the gaps in our understanding, how we have projected our hopes and fears onto the blank spaces of the map. When Sclater proposed Lemuria, he was acting as a good scientist, making the best possible inference from the data available to him. He was wrong in his specific hypothesis, but his underlying intuition that the Earth's history is full of hidden connections was entirely correct. When Leplongeon and Churchward expanded on that idea, they transformed it into a myth. They moved beyond the evidence, spinning elaborate narratives that satisfied a deep human need for meaning, for a grand and glorious past. Their Mu was a mirror, reflecting the anxieties and aspirations of their own times. And yet, their myths were not without a kernel of truth. The Pacific Ocean does conceal lost continents. The Earth's surface is not static. It is a fluid, dynamic system, constantly shaping and reshaping the geography of our planet. The real story of Mu is the story of this transformation, of how we have moved from a static, mythological view of the Earth to a dynamic, scientific one. Today, the search for lost continents continues. In recent years, geologists have proposed the existence of other sunken landmasses, including a vast region in the South Pacific, known as the Hikurangi Plateau, which may have once been part of a larger continent. Advances in seafloor mapping and satellite technology are constantly revealing new details about the hidden topography of the ocean floor. The tools of modern science have become vastly more powerful than the intuitions of the 19th century or the visions of the occultists. Yet, The human impulse that drove Sclater, Churchward, and the others remains the same. We want to know where we came from. We want to understand the deep history of our planet, the journeys and transformations that have brought us to where we are today. The story of Mu is a powerful reminder that our understanding of the past is always provisional, always subject to revision, and always shaped by the cultural and intellectual context in which we live. It is also a testament to the power of myth, of the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a world that is often baffling and mysterious. The ghost continent has been found, but its meaning continues to evolve. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of all. The past is not a fixed, unchanging thing. It is a living story, constantly rewritten by each new generation of explorers, scientists, and dreamers. The Pacific Ocean still hides its secret. The mists that rise from its surface are not just water vapor. They are the breath of a million vanished landscapes. And if you listen closely, beyond the wind and the waves, you might just hear the whisper of another time, another place, another continent that once was. But now you know the truth. It isn't a myth of ancient kings and flying machines. It's something far more astonishing. The slow, relentless story of our changing planet, written in the bones of lemurs and the zircons of extinct volcanoes. Mu was never a motherland of man. It was, and continues to be, a frontier of human imagination, a reminder that the most remarkable discoveries often lie, not in the stories we invent, but in the quiet patience of the earth itself.